Okay, so here we are. This is the inaugural episode of Flea Market Fantasy. I am one of your co-hosts. This is Mike L. from the Comic Book Syndicate, and I'd like to introduce... Go ahead, Mike.
It's Michael Dell of the LCS Hockey Radio Show.
Yes!
So, we have... Now, how long have we known each other? And when we say know each other, we don't mean biblically. We mean, how do we know each other through doing podcasts and stuff like that?
It's got to be like... I've been doing the LCS Hockey Show with my buddy Larry for 12 years, which is pretty much as long as you guys have been doing the Comic Book Syndicate, correct?
Actually 2007, so it's been 14 years.
Yeah.
Wait. 2000. We're both really bad at math.
I don't mean to trip you up on the math, but yeah, 19 minus 7 is 12. Yeah, that's the way it works.
Okay, you're right.
Or you are in Canada, so maybe you guys are on the metric system.
Well, you go by metric time here, so it's completely different.
Okay. But you started doing our podcast probably at least 7-8 years ago, right?
Yeah, at least. And I'm not sure how many I've done, but it's at least 3 or 4 per year usually, right?
Yeah, and we have your buddy G.I. Jolie come on, and we always have a good time.
It's always fun. I always appreciate you having me on, especially since I know absolutely nothing about hockey.
And we always appreciate when you come on because we never like to book guests.
Yeah. Understandable.
But the big thing here is I used to write the Flea Market Fantasy column for the Comic Book Syndicate, but you reached out to me a few weeks back and you're like, hey, Mike Dell, I want to do some new content, some new audio content for the Comic Book Syndicate. Well, first of all, you said you were thinking of doing like a fetish amateur porn site.
That was my first idea.
Yeah, that was your first idea.
Yep.
And I said, no, Michael, stick to comic books. Stick to comic books. So you said, let's do an audio podcast, and here we are.
Yes.
An audio podcast.
And we discussed a few names, and we got a little bit of feedback on Twitter, and a lot of people liked the suggestion of El Del Radio, but I don't know if we're necessarily going to go with that. But
I think it's supposed to be pronounced El Del Radio.
Oh, right. Now, you know what's funny? I'm so embarrassed to say this, but okay, do you remember the episode that you did of the Syndicate where you came on and reviewed Avengers with G.I. Jolie and myself?
Yes.
Well, it turns out I was going through the archives, and when I put that episode to TV, take a guess what I called it.
I have no idea.
El Del Radio.
Really?
Yeah, I just completely forgot.
Well, then we might have to do that here then, El Del Radio. Also, I had another suggestion. One of our listeners on the LCS show said, what about Del OL?
Del OL?
Like LOL?
Oh, okay. Del OL.
That's not bad.
That's not too bad. Okay, but we could just go with the name of your text reviews, which is Flea Market Fantasy. What do you think of that?
I think we'll go with that. And that title comes from a few things. Well, first of all, the old Screeching Weasel song, Supermarket Fantasy. So I always think that's always playing in my head when I hear Flea Market Fantasy. But when you're a kid, you go to the flea market and you hope you find somebody there with a couple long boxes of old comic books, and that's your dream, to find some good old comic books. And this show will highlight comics from the 70s and 80s.
Right, absolutely. And that's when we both grew up. We're roughly the same age, right?
Yes, I was born in 75.
Yes. I was born in 76, so
there you go. And we grew up liking the same comics, so that's what we're going to highlight here on the show, comics from that era, the kinds you'd like to find at a flea market. And I'm Team Marvel. I love Marvel. And Michael, you like them both, but you tend to lean a little DC, right? You enjoy the DC.
I definitely. You know what's funny is I would say post 86 I lean DC, but pre 86 I do kind of lean Marvel.
All right, so the idea behind the show is each episode we will focus on one comic, one issue from that era. And we'll take turns picking each week. Is that how we're going to do this?
Absolutely, yep. Unless we can come up with a better system. That's what we got so far. So.
All right, so this first week I made the first pick, and then Michael will pick next week's. And if you want DC, Michael, you're going to have to pick some DC because I'm never going to pick DC.
That's good because I've already got a DC comic picked out for next week, so it all works out.
All right. So that's the whole point behind the Flea Market Fantasy. One issue each week. We'll delve into the plot, the characters, the art, the writing, memorable moments, that kind of stuff, and it'll be a hell of a time, right? I can't wait.
So let's talk about. So you know what's funny is that you picked this comic, and I had this comic. Oh, should we talk about what it is?
Yeah, that might be good if we mention what it is.
It'll help, right?
Captain America 249. Okay, and this is from 1980.
September 1980.
Yeah, September 1980. Now the funny thing is this comic had been sitting in my collection for years, and I had tried to get the whole run of Roger Stern and John Byrne Captain America comics, and I finally got them all. So I sat down to read them just a few months ago. So I'd actually just read this, and then I reread it again for this show. So it kind of works out.
The reason I picked this is when I was a kid, like this came out in '80, so I was 5 years old. I had basically the whole run of Stern and John Byrne. They only did 9 issues, 47 to 55, 247 to 255, and I had pretty much them all in that run when I was a kid. And so this comic always stuck in my memory because I love this era of Captain America. When I was a kid, nothing was better than reading a Captain America comic book, eating Cookie Crisp cereal, and drinking strawberry Nestle Quick. That was the best. You can't get better than that. Yeah.
I have a ritual too. If I can cut in, I would eat Arby's roast beef sandwiches and or a Score bar. Remember Score bars?
I don't remember a Score bar. Well, you're Canadian, so I don't know. Maybe
Americans don't have Score bars are chocolate, and then the inside is kind of like almost like toffee or taffy.
Yeah, we don't. I don't think we had those in the States.
Amazing. Okay. Anyway, continue on.
But yeah, so that era of Captain America, I'm very fond of it. So when we're talking about an issue, I'm like, oh, we'll go back there. And this particular issue, I just remember on the cover of Captain America is fighting some robots that look like the Thing and robots that look like the Thing and Spider-Man and Magneto and stuff. So I'm like, oh yeah, this is great. But I don't really remember. I didn't remember much about the story. I just remember I liked it. And but then when I went to go look through my old comic books to find it, I can't find it. I must have sold it at some point over the years. I don't have any of the Captain America from this time, although I know I used to have them. So in the past 40 years, I must have lost them. But so you can get these comic books though if you're looking to read along with us. You can get them on Marvel Unlimited or Comixology. Log into there. The title of the issue is "Death, Where Is Thy Sting?" And that's a little foreshadowing a little bit for the ending.
It's awesome. It sounds like it's obviously a reference to Shakespeare. I'm not sure what, but
anytime there's a thy involved, it's a reference to Shakespeare.
Yeah.
Thee or thou or thy.
Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. No, it's the Bible. It's "O death, where is thy sting?" It's 1 Corinthians.
Well, you got me there. I have no idea. I'm not up on my Bible either. All right. So what we'll do is we'll first let's talk about the issue itself. Let's look at the plot. What happens in the issue, and then we'll come around and we'll talk about the creators and that kind of stuff, all right?
Sure. So we're kind of in the middle of a storyline here where Captain America has run into a character named Dragon Man. And Dragon Man, despite his name, he's neither a dragon nor a man. He's kind of a humanoid-looking monster that somewhat resembles a dragon, but not really. I don't know much of his backstory, but
well, see, I do know some of his backstory. He's like he kind of looks like a giant flying gargoyle in a way. He's like 15 feet tall, and apparently he tips the scales at 6,000 pounds.
Whoa!
Research. Yeah, he's a big boy, the Dragon Man. But he's like a dope. He's not smart at all. He's just a big oaf, kind of a flying gargoyle. And apparently his first appearance, I believe, was Fantastic Four 35.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
And some college professor created him as a robot. He was initially a robot.
Okay.
And do you remember the Fantastic Four villain named Diablo?
Of course.
Okay, well, I'm not very familiar with Diablo, but I had to look him up. And once I saw him, I'm like, oh, yeah, I recognize that guy. But he like dressed in like purple pajamas and he had like a black mask. And I don't know, you'd recognize him if you saw him. But anyway, Diablo came down with that professor who made the robot or Dragon Man, and he brought him to life. So he made him a living creature.
Okay, interesting.
For his magic and whatnot. Yeah, so that's the Dragon Man. And then he had a couple adventures. He would try and fight the Fantastic Four, but he was always at under the will of Diablo. Like Diablo was always controlling him.
Okay.
And in this issue, in this storyline, he's being controlled by someone else, Michael. Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Machine Smith.
And it's it kind of takes a strange turn because Dragon Man ends up sort of flying back to find out, find his master, his creator, and we end up meeting Machine Smith, and then we go through a series of twists where first Captain America fights robotic versions of the Thing, Magneto, and Spider-Man, and then another ongoing subplot is that he keeps thinking that he's defeated Machine Smith, and then finding out the Machine Smith that he's defeated is not the real Machine Smith; he's a robot duplicate.
Do you have even any idea who Machine Smith is before reading this issue? Like, did you ever encounter Machine Smith?
Oh, I'm sure I have, but I don't. Do you know more? You probably know more about him than I do.
Yeah, like I had never heard of him, but he's basically like a bald guy in a yellow jumpsuit, and he has an interesting beard. He has like
yes, he does.
like two horns of hair sticking out the
Yes.
sides of his chin, and that's Machine Smith. Yeah, so he's a weird dude. But apparently he says because in the issue then, when Captain America is fighting this robot, Machine Smith, there's all these different robots, and
Yes.
Machine Smith starts telling his backstory. He's just explaining who he is and what he's done. And apparently he used to pretend to be Mr. Fear, and he fought Daredevil
Right.
when he was Mr. Fear, and he fell and died, and his own robots came and like put him back together and put his consciousness into a big computer.
Yes. Don't you love Marvel continuity? I love it, eh? It all ties together.
But this was written in 1980, and it's very much with today's talk of transhumanism and merging computers and machines. Here it is. Look at this. 40 years ago, they were doing it in Captain America. How about that?
It's pretty amazing, I must say. Some interesting foresight here. Now, should we give away the ending of what happens at the end, or?
Well, yeah, we're gonna talk about the ending here.
So basically, yeah. So we're kind of tricked a few times into thinking that, Machine Smith kind of pulls a fast one on Cap a few times. Then at the very, very end, what we finally discover is that he's actually used Captain America to help him commit suicide so that he can permanently transfer his consciousness just to a computer. So he's no longer...
Yeah, he wants to be dead. He doesn't even want to... Yeah, he doesn't want to be alive in the computer. He just wants to be dead.
Oh, he doesn't want to be alive. Okay.
Yeah, he doesn't want to be alive at all. His consciousness is already in the computer. That's why he's able to jump around to the different robots. But see, the problem was he had given his robot minions a prime directive to always preserve his life. That's why they saved him after the fight with Daredevil. And even though he didn't want to live anymore as just in a machine, not as a human, they wouldn't let him die. They kept him alive in the computer. So Machine Smith, being the wily guy he is, he decided to attack Captain America with his robots to lure him and Dragon Man and to lure him into his lair. And then Captain America would figure out that to stop him, he'd have to destroy the computer. And by destroying the computer, he would kill Machine Smith, and he would finally be able to die. And that's the title. Death, where is thy sting? Machine Smith wanted to die all these years, and now he finally did. He died.
It's actually pretty dark, eh?
It's tremendous. I love it.
I mean,
yeah, it's great. It's it's a good twist. I mean, who likes, there's nothing better than a good twist of an ending for a story, right?
So it was really well done. It wasn't really what you were expecting going in. Like, this villain wanted to kill himself, and it's basically like euthanasia, assisted suicide, and Captain America's Dr. Kevorkian. That's basically what this is. Yeah.
It's also cool to see Captain America manipulated that way because he's he's one of my favorite characters, but he's such a do-gooder, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just a great story to see him manipulated that way.
And then the closing quote, Michael, after Captain America figures out what's going on and that he himself had killed Machine Smith, the closing quote, I'll never stop believing that life is something most sacred, something to be sacrificed only for the greatest of causes, liberty. Yeah. That's the closing line. That's like the epitome of Captain America, the ideal Captain America line. And then the best thing is right after that line, they give a preview for next month's issue. Captain America runs for president.
Yeah, I know.
It's like,
great.
Oh.
So this is totally my era, and for people that don't know, I think there's a specific style to these comics that I think makes us both like them so much, Like, if they're heavy on narration, right? There's a lot of prose. There's a lot of thought bubbles, right? There's a lot of dialogue. Like, this comic probably took me...
A lot of explanations. Right. They always explain what's going on.
Yeah, and sometimes a little bit too much. But overall, I like it because, it probably took me at least 20 minutes to read, which is a good, satisfying, Like, you figure this cost what? I don't even know what it costs. Let's go to the cover. 50 cents. I mean, there, you got your 50 cents worth. Absolutely, right?
When the story opens, Captain America is fighting Dragon Man, and Dragon Man's got him in
Yes.
like a big old bear hug, and he's about to crush him. And how does Captain America get out, Michael? What, he uses the old noodle.
He uses his glove. When you talk when he throws his glove to hit him in the eye, outrageous. Again, it was one of those things where I laughed out loud because it's like, of course, I never would have thought of that. But yeah, obviously.
It was
Yeah.
great. And Roger Stern, the writer, he has it like something like Captain America winds up like a major league pitcher or something and throws it into his, like a perfect fastball into his eye.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With a skill rivaling that of any major league pitcher, Cap lines up a shot and lets fly with his leather gauntlet, hitting the one sensitive area on Dragon Man's body. It's great.
Yeah.
It's smart. Well, I like when characters use their abilities in, innovative ways.
Yeah. So it was very good. And then we should say Dragon Man is being controlled by this like metal orb that's flying around his head, like brainwashing him. And
Right.
then Captain America breaks that orb. Then Dragon Man wants to go get revenge on Machine Smith. So that's where Captain America hitches a ride and follows him there.
Mm-hmm.
And then when he gets Machine Smith, though, Machine Smith shoots like 3 other metal orbs at Dragon Man, and they electrocute him and knock him unconscious. But then Captain America, he destroys those silver orbs by throwing his shield, and he breaks them in the pattern of a giant star.
Yeah. Oh my God. I didn't even notice that.
What?
No, I didn't notice the star. Like, I don't know how I didn't notice that, but
It's the best.
it's ridiculous. Yeah. Like, not only is he bouncing his shield 5 times and hitting all 3 of those orbs, you're right, but he's bouncing it into the shape of a star. It's outrageous.
And then the other great thing about Cap throughout this issue is he's calling everybody fella. He's like, "Hey, fella."
Yeah.
I don't believe that, fella. I'm always a fan of that. And,
What an outdated anachronism, but anyway.
but I love it. And then another interesting bit about the robots. You mentioned that there's a Thing robot without a head, Magneto robot. Yeah, these are all like unfinished robots. Like there's a
Sure.
Spider-Man robot without his face, but there is also another robot lined up against the wall. You don't see Captain America fight him, but he's next to the other robots in the background of one of these panels. And I don't know if did you recognize that fella, who he was?
You know what? Let me. Oh, okay. I see Airwalker, right?
That's right.
Right.
Like now, who's Airwalker, Michael?
Oh, geez. Airwalker, was he introduced in Fantastic Four as well, or was that Thor? Or was it Silver Surfer?
Airwalker is the second Herald of Galactus.
Right.
Took over for the Silver
Hey.
Surfer.
That's right. Okay, because I read Silver Surfer like last year, so I must have came across him in Silver Surfer then.
But I'm impressed that you recognize him because I had never heard of him. I had no idea.
Yeah, it's funny though, is like, did you read Marvel Universe as a kid, like the guides to all the characters?
I love that. I still have.
Oh,
Yeah, like I actually probably know more about Marvel from reading those than reading the actual comics, because I had all those as a kid.
Tell the
And
people what Marvel Universe was if they don't know.
It was basically, I mean, how do you describe it? It's like it's a guide to every character in the Marvel Universe. And there was I think 3 total published. There was I think 83, 85, there was Update 89, then there was a loose leaf format after that. But basically every major character that you could think of was listed alphabetically in these comics. They had a picture of the character, they had a little text piece describing their history and blah blah blah. And then they always had panels from the comics reprinted without the speech bubble, so you could always see samples of classic art by Jack Kirby or John Byrne or whoever. So it was great because just looking through those issues, those Marvel universes, it made me want to go back and read these classic stories, right? And so that's how I know Airwalker. I probably have only read one story with him in it, but I just know him from Marvel Universe.
Well, I'm impressed.
Yeah.
That's why you're Mike L. You know your stuff.
Yeah.
One other thing about this issue, there's a scene that doesn't involve Cap at all. It's with the crowd after like his fight with Dragon Man. Like the fire trucks are showing up and stuff, and they're because I guess the attack happened right outside his apartment building. I believe this was the era where Captain America was undercover. He was Steve Rogers, but everyone thought he was in the advertising biz, right? Wasn't he like in the advertising business or something?
I think, I'm not sure exactly what his official title was, but I know that at one point he was an artist. Like, I think he was actually drawing Captain America comics, right?
Oh, well, I don't know about that. I don't remember that. But I think he was like in the advertising biz doing like stuff like that, like an artist or whatever, an illustrator or something. But there's people on the street, his one next door neighbor, Josh, and the other girl, Bernie. That was his love interest. I didn't recognize her. Do you remember her name?
I mean, I only know it because I just read this story, but yeah, I mean, I don't know how long she lasted. I mean, if I check my handy Google here.
Well, her name was Bernadette Rosenthal. And,
right.
And I looked it up. It said she was a renowned glass blower in the neighborhood.
Really?
Yeah, glass blower. But she was actually engaged to Steve Rogers. She didn't know he was Captain America, from what I gathered from the book. Like, it sounds like they didn't know. I think the narration says that they didn't know that he was Captain America. But she eventually got engaged to Steve Rogers. They broke off the engagement. She went to like Wisconsin or something and became a lawyer. And then I guess later on, she represented Bucky Barnes in some trial or something. I don't know.
Really?
Yeah, but I had no recollection of this woman at all.
No, yeah. See, I know her because from reading these comics as a kid, but she must have disappeared. I think according to this, she appeared only 2 issues before the one we're reading, 247. So she was probably introduced by Roger Stern and John Byrne, and then she probably disappeared when they left, and then maybe they brought her back later. I don't know. Yeah, briefly, yeah. Yeah,
but it was just someone I never knew existed, and apparently she was engaged to Captain America. Who knows?
Interesting.
All right, yeah, so let's get into the creators. We mentioned Roger Stern is the writer, and I guess him and Byrne co-plotted it, and then he did the script. What do you know about Roger Stern, Michael?
Well, Roger Stern has a legendary career writing Spider-Man in the early 80s. He did Captain America with John Byrne. He also had a really long run on the Avengers. Basically the 200s. He basically did that whole era. And then he had a falling out, I believe, with Marvel Editorial. I think it was Jim Shooter. And he eventually moved over to DC and ended up doing Superman for a while. And he had a fairly successful run. Actually, he followed John Byrne on Superman. And he did a really interesting storyline where, I don't know if you probably didn't read it, but there's a storyline John Byrne did that I liked as a kid, and now I kind of hate it, but he had Superman execute the Phantom Zone villains. And so Superman, as we know, Superman never kills, but in this John Byrne story, I guess he wanted to, shock the readers, and so he had Superman execute the 3 Phantom Zone villains. And so then he left Superman, and then Roger Stern came in and had this really clever idea where Superman was so distraught over having to kill these villains that he developed a split personality. And what ended up happening was every night there'd be this vigilante going around Gotham patrolling the streets named Gangbuster, and then after a few issues you find out that it's actually Superman unconsciously dressing up as this character and going out and fighting crime because he was disassociating himself from being a murderer. So it's a really cool, way to deal with the execution.
And if you have to have a split personality, I guess going out and fighting crime is still pretty good. It's
might as well. Yeah, what else are you gonna do? Right?
Yeah. Dressing up like a lady, going to biker bars.
Yeah.
You don't want that. That's not good. Yeah, I never read any Superman stuff, so
really,
you're gonna have to take that. I can't. But Stern, a couple other notes about Roger Stern. He co-created the second Captain Marvel. What's her name?
Monica Rambeau.
Yes, he co-created her. He created the West Coast Avengers. That was his brainchild, I guess. And he also created the Hobgoblin.
Yes, I know that. Yes, because when I was a kid, it was the Hobgoblin story that really, really got me interested in Spider-Man. So I was familiar with Roger Stern, and I knew that he created the Hobgoblin. And there's a whole other thing behind that too. He actually ended up leaving Spider-Man before he could resolve that storyline correctly. So
yeah, and they resolved it in a way that he did not like it being resolved, right? Like they kind of butchered the end of that, right?
Right, it was pretty terrible, yeah.
All right. Also, here's an interesting bit. In the early 1970s, when he was like 19, 20 and stuff, he ran a little comic fanzine called CPL, Contemporary Pictorial Literature.
Really?
And he started it with Bob Layton, and in that it's kind of like LCS. I started LCS hockey when I was 19 and with my buddies, and he would have different artists contribute to the fanzine, and one of those artists was a young John Byrne.
Really?
And then they both got hired at Marvel in 1975.
It's always interesting to hear about these stories because it gives me hope that one day you and me and Larry and G.I. Jolie will all work at Marvel or DC, right?
Who knows?
We're just a 40-year overnight success story.
Yeah.
That's all it is.
We haven't quite made it yet. Maybe when we're 50. Maybe when we're 50 we'll make it. We'll see.
Well, I'm sure this podcast will open up a lot of doors for us.
There you go.
People will listen to this and it'll go crazy. Now, how'd you feel about the writing? We mentioned the writing a little exposition heavy, but that was just the era. That's the way it was. But I thought the plot was tremendous, and the Machine Smith and the little twist at the end. I was a big fan of this, the writing in this. I thought it was great.
Yeah, you know what? I've always liked Roger Stern growing up, and having read more of his stuff now as an adult, I guess it's if I could sort of pin him down, I would say that he's almost like the baseline, and I'm saying this in a good way. He's like the baseline Marvel writer. He's not quite like Chris Claremont was maybe more, his characters were a little bit more realistic, and other writers like Jim Starlin were a little bit more, he got into the cosmic stuff and the psychedelic stuff, and other people might have been more funny, like say Steve Gerber. But I think Roger Stern was kind of like just the straight ahead meat and potatoes superhero writer, of that time. Like I think he was probably the state of the art. Like we said, he wrote Avengers, he wrote Spider-Man. He wrote Captain America, so he pretty much had his finger in every pie, and I think he was definitely one of the better Marvel writers of that time. And like we said, the fact that he's got this, it's not a lot to ask for, but it's still rare. I mean, a nice twist ending, right? So he definitely knows what he's doing. Like we said, it's a little bit talky, there's a little bit too much exposition, but there's definitely a charm to that, and I really do like his writing style.
Yeah, that was pretty much standard for the era back then. I mean,
right.
Pretty much every issue had that. The other thing about Stern, after Marvel hired him, he worked as an editor for most of that time initially. And then like these issues of Captain America, this was pretty much his first real go at writing. He did a couple limited runs, a couple issues here or there, different titles, but this was his first major 9-issue run on anything. So
really,
yeah, it's pretty good. All right, now the art, John Byrne. Are you a fan? I'm a big fan of John Byrne. I don't know. It seems like he's a controversial figure in the comics community. Is that how you seem to understand
Well, yeah. See, now, this is the thing, is when I grew up, I was a huge John Byrne fan, okay? I used to have a list of every comic he did, and at one point I had almost everything he ever drew. But then as time went on, I kind of found the quality of his art started to decline, okay? And I actually think he peaked on X-Men, and he started to slightly decline about midway through his Fantastic Four run. And then by the time he got to the 90s, his art was pretty rough, pretty sketchy. And by the time he got to the 2000s, honestly, I think his art is like sub-professional now. I don't know if you've seen his newer stuff. Yeah, it's terrible.
My only knowledge of John Byrne is from the glory days of the X-Men, and that's pretty much it. Oh, in this early Avengers, because he did some stuff on Avengers I have, and this Captain America stuff. That's what I think of when I think of John Byrne. I really have no knowledge of him in the 90s or the 2000s, so I just remember him from his golden era. So he's tremendous in my eyes.
Yeah, when he was doing like Marvel Team Up and Iron Fist, his art was really polished. You could tell that he took, a lot of time to do the pages. But even he said that he was kind of disappointed because most people tended to think his earlier stuff was better, but he felt that his anatomy was getting better as he was getting older, which is kind of true. Like if you look at his stuff from the late 80s and the early 90s, he could clearly draw better. It's just that the downside a lot of times with artists is that as they become more comfortable with drawing, they tend to be lazy, right? They're like, well, they don't need to try as hard, so they kind of just rush through it because they're better. But the downside is they take shortcuts, right? They start to cut corners. And so, unfortunately, because I know how bad his later art is, I can look at this stuff and I can kind of see the seeds, like he was already planting the seeds of his own destruction. You know what I mean? So, he's definitely a good storyteller, but to me, I think his layouts are are definitely clear, but they're not spectacular. You know, they're not like something Jack Kirby would do. They're not something John Buscema would do. And so at this point, I look at this art, especially as it's inked by Joe Rubinstein, who I'm not a huge fan of. I just find this art almost like just serviceable. You know, I don't think it's spectacular. Yeah. So do you think this art in this issue is really good?
It's not his best. But it's solid. I thought he always drew Dragon Man really well. His pics of Dragon Man are really good. But I mean, it's solid. But I agree, it's not like that top tier stuff for him. But we should point out though, this was 1980, and his run on X-Men was 77 to 81. So he was doing this while he was drawing X-Men, and while he also was working on Avengers. So he was drawing a lot. So that could be why this probably wasn't his best.
Well, you know what? I give him credit because that's one weird thing about these, you know, these 70s and 80s artists. Like even like Jack Kirby was doing like 5 pages a day. John Buscema was doing 6 pages a day. And, you know, so I give credit to John Byrne for, I think he also did 3 to 5 pages a day. And nowadays, I know that most comic book artists are lucky if they can do 1 page a day. So they're doing something wrong, if you ask me, you know?
They're trying not to have some jerks on podcasts say their art looks rushed in sketches.
Yeah, that's a good point. They're
trying to take their time. But again, John Byrne, apparently he also had, there was a point where he spoke out against Kirby and other people who were complaining about Marvel and DC screwing over creators, and he said he was happy to be a company man.
Right.
Something. And so that got a lot of... got him in trouble with his fellow creators. And I guess he has a tendency and a reputation for being headstrong.
Well, yeah, because I mean, he's clearly, I think as time went on, he sort of became less popular and less successful. And I think by the late 90s, I think he pretty much ceased working for Marvel and DC for the most part. And I think since then, he's kind of just become this bitter, curmudgeonly old man, you know, just... And the thing is, you know, some people say that Alan Moore is a curmudgeon, but there's a difference between being sort of like just grouchy and just being a complete asshole. Like I've heard John Byrne say that he can't accept Latino women with blonde hair because he says they look like hookers. He's just really kind of, I don't know, kind of petty, you know? And so unfortunately that's affected my enjoyment of his artwork as well. So it's hard for me to judge him objectively.
But that run on X-Men, holy hell. He was there for, the Dark Phoenix saga, which is legendary, the Days of Futures Past. He created Alpha Flight. As a good Canadian boy, you must respect that he created Alpha Flight. Absolutely.
And that's the thing. Yeah, John Byrne is Canadian. And the thing, I don't want to get into a big thing about Alpha Flight, but I love the fact that Alpha Flight represents, you know, almost every aspect of Canadian heritage, right? You've got
Puck.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, Puck right there. You got hockey. You've got Guardian. So he's sort of the Anglo-Canadian. You've got North Star and Polaris, which are Franco-Canadian, right? Then you've got what's the native guy's name? Anyway, he represents
Talisman. Was it?
Yes, Talisman represents like native First Nations people, and then you have Snowbird that represents the Inuit, right? And then you have Sasquatch, which is kind of like North American folklore, you know. So it's really cool the way he touched on all the aspects of Canadian culture. So that was really cool.
Yeah, he also, of course, co-created Kitty Pryde.
Yes,
very important. Emma Frost.
Yep.
And that's a fascinating story because, you know, the one thing I always loved about the Hellfire Club is that they don't look like your typical Marvel supervillain, right? Like they're almost like, you know, the what's that? Like the Freemasons or something, right?
Yes, like a secret society. Yeah.
Right. Really cool. Yeah, I really like those characters.
Yeah, that whole run was tremendous. He also created Sabretooth, Rachel Summers.
That's right. Okay.
Omega Red, another one of his creations, apparently.
He must have co-created Omega Red because I think Omega Red was designed by Jim Lee, right?
Yeah, I don't. Maybe I should check that. But yeah, it would be a co-creation. But yeah, he had a hand in Omega Red because I couldn't remember. Like, it wasn't Omega Red like much later in the X-Men run. Like, did he ever pop up earlier?
Yeah. So what happened was Chris Claremont was basically he was ousted from X-Men by Bob Harris. Chris Claremont got into a disagreement about the direction of X-Men. I don't know the details, but Jim Lee wanted to go kind of retro, and Chris Claremont wanted to do his own thing, and Bob Harras sided with Jim Lee, and so Chris Claremont said, okay, well, if you're going to side with him, then screw you, and I'm leaving. And so Bob Harras was kind of in a panic because this happened right after the X-Men had launched their new number one, right? In 1991. And so X-Men was the best-selling comic in the industry. And so Bob Harras was like, oh, geez, who am I going to get to take over as writer then? Because Jim Lee, it doesn't have any experience writing. So he instinctively thought, okay, well, I'll get John Byrne. So he hired John Byrne to basically write the dialogue over Jim Lee and Whilce Portacio's plots. But what happened was Jim Lee and Whilce Portacio kept missing the deadlines for handing in these plots. And so John Byrne would have to scramble to dialogue pages, sometimes out of order. And I think the last straw was Jim Lee handed in an issue 2 days before the script was due. And so Bob Harras was freaking out, and I think it was Fabian Nicieza suggested that he use Scott Lobdell, who up until that point had only experienced two things. He had experience writing Alpha Flight, and he had experience as a stand-up comedian. And so he was the obvious choice to take over the best-selling comic in the industry. And so voila, we have Scott Lobdell becoming the highest-paid writer in the comic book industry in the 90s. I think at one point he was making $80,000 a month.
What? X-Men. Yep. No joke.
Holy fuck. That's a great story. And I did look it up.
Yeah.
I had no idea John Byrne had ever written the newer X-Men issue. But yeah, Omega Red made his debut in number 4 of that series. And the co-creators were Jim Lee and John Byrne. How about that?
Go.
Yep. There you go. I'm trying to think if I have any other notes about John Byrne. But yeah, I was just a big fan of that era of his work. Hey, let me ask you this, Michael. Do you ever see a celebrity or an actor or someone or an athlete, some famous person, and think, oh, that person would be drawn by this artist because they just look like that artist's style? Did you ever think that? Because for me, John Byrne would Valerie Harper and Mary Tyler Moore of the Mary Tyler Moore Show era.
Really?
There is a Rhoda comic book John Byrne would draw. Yes.
Oh, and basically, you're from this issue, you could look at that one page of Bernie, right? Is that what makes you think of those two?
Well, not this issue, but just in general, throughout my history of reading John Byrne, I always thought, if Valerie Harper, he would draw Valerie Harper, Rhoda. That's what he would.
Interesting. Okay, so for listeners, go to page 6 of this issue because I actually have to agree that even just this one panel of Bernie looking at this close up, I totally see Valerie there.
Because he would draw his women with big eyes and a big mouth, and just I don't know. And I guess the '70s fashions play into that as well, But
good observation there.
So I don't know. Keep an eye out for that, Michael. Next time you see, hey, what artist would draw this person or that person? It'll be an interesting list for a future episode of Flea Market Fantasy. So yeah, John Byrne, if I made my list of top 11 favorite comic book artists, he'd be there towards the bottom there, but he would be on that list just because I'm such a fan of his work from the late 70s, early 80s.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, if I were to have to pick my list of favorite artists from the late 70s and early 80s, he'd probably be my top 10. But as far as of all time, no, he wouldn't be. No.
All right. Fair enough.
Yeah.
So what do you think, Michael? 249, Captain America. Thumbs up? Big fan?
I give it a thumbs up. Not quite as good as I probably thought it was when I read it as a kid, but still a good comic. It definitely, I think Roger Stern and John Byrne can be counted on to turn in a good standard superhero comic of its day. Definitely good.
Yeah. Yeah, just real solid, and a nice story, nice twist there at the end. So yeah, I'm a big fan of this. I don't know, are we gonna rate these issues 1 out of 10 or just yay or nay? What are we gonna do here, Michael?
That's a good question. We could rate it out of 10.
I'd probably give it an 8 out of 10. So
really?
8 out of 10. Yeah.
I'll give it. Oh boy, this is tough because I really love reading these stories, but I guess objectively, I could say maybe it's a 6 or 6.5 out of 10.
Whoa. Well, first of all, let's lose this 0.5 nonsense right away. Larry always tries to do that on the LCS show. It's either a 6 or it's a 7. None of this 6.5 nonsense. Let's go.
Okay, then you know what? I'm going to say a 6 because And just to qualify my criteria, I think a 5 is like readable, and then 6 is better than that, and 7 is kind of like excellent. You know what I mean? So I give it a 6.
Yeah. See, I give it the 8 because you got John Byrne, you got Dragon Man, you got Machine Smith in his little yellow jumpsuit, you got robots, you got robot fights, you got a shield busting up silver orbs in the shape of a star. It's amazing.
You've got him throwing a glove at his eye, right? Yeah.
But it's just Captain America. You get that legendary Captain America quote at the end of the issue. Nice twist story, actually a well thought out story and a great plot. So yeah, it's an 8. Easy 8 out of 10 for me.
Okay. Both recommended by both of us. So this is definitely a good example of an 80s comic, right?
Yep.
And specifically, I mean, I think both of us prefer to read 80s comics as opposed to 2019 comics.
That's correct.
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't go out of my way to read anything current, but I'll always read old stuff.
Right. And the thing is I mean, we can talk about this more as we go, but I think one of the things is how long. It's not just the quantity of how long it took to read. It's more of the quality that I feel like the creators are putting into it. Because I know for a fact, because they've told me, some of these newer creators, they only spend 4 hours writing a script. And I guarantee that they spent, I don't know how long, maybe it was a day or a week, but it feels like they put a lot more effort into this comic, don't you think?
Yeah, there's definitely some thought put into this one with the whole plot of Machine. Because again, this was just the end of this storyline. I guess the preceding issue, Machine Smith had sent his robots out to fight Captain America and stuff. So
okay,
I want to keep doing this podcast until we get Mike L to start pronouncing robots as robots, and then it'll be tremendous. Oh, you know what I was going to say is we should remind everybody I'm not just some chimp. I know what I'm talking about. Mike L, you all know Mike L. You comic book syndicates, you know Mike L. He's Mr. Comic Book. So, but what are my qualifications to be talking about comic books? Well, I love comic books, but I also have an MFA in writing popular fiction. I'm a published mystery author. I run a little independent publishing brand. I make my living as a freelance fiction editor. So I'm not a chimp here. I know what I'm talking about when it comes to plotting and characters and story. So, you can believe me when I say something's decent, Yeah.
And I have none of those qualifications. All I do is video, which is completely unrelated to this. I own a lot of comic books.
Does that
You're
count?
Mr. Comic Book. You recognized Airwalker in the background of that panel.
That's true. You know what? That's true. I take it back. I know exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah.
So, what I'm trying to get at here is you can trust us. We're experts, damn it. When we say something's good or bad, you can take it to the bank. You hear me? Yeah.
You could say that we are authorities on the subject.
That's exactly right. All right, Mike L. So next week,
oh, I thought long and hard about this one. Okay. Next week we are going to review the very first comic book that I ever bought. Okay.
Oh.
Brave and the Bold, number 192. Okay. Featuring Batman teamed up with Superboy.
Superboy? Who canceled?
Yep.
Superboy.
Now the first thing, but
What's the only thing worse than Superman? Oh, I know. Let's make like Superman, but a little kid. Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, exactly. And you know what's funny is one of the twists of the story is how can Batman possibly team up with Superboy when Superboy is Superman, right? Like Superman and Batman are the same age, so how can he team up with Superboy? Well, you're only going to find out by reading this issue.
How can he not? Batman likes little kids. I mean, there
you go. Yeah.
He's been palling around with Robin all the time. A little weird, little Jeffrey Epstein-ish. That's all I'm saying.
So you're going to tell me you've never read a DC comic?
No, I've read DC Comics. When I was a little kid, I used to get Batman on Detective Comics and stuff like that.
Oh, okay.
But, I'm not a fan of DC. Okay. We've talked about this many times, Mike O, but for me, growing up, I love Marvel because it was set in my world. I could go to New York City and I could see Spider-Man. I could see the Avengers. I could see the Fantastic Four. Where's Gotham on the map? I'm sorry, where's Metropolis? It's all fake and funny.
Some of us like to use our imagination, I guess, right? I'm positive that reading these DC choices that I'll have, not all of them will be DC, but some of them will, I'm sure that I will win you over.
I'm positive.
Hey, spoiler alert for next week. I'm giving it a 1.
No, come on. You got to use your degree and be objective here, right?
We'll see. We'll
All
see.
right.
All right, Michael. Well, I think it was a successful first episode of Flea Market Fantasy.
Absolutely. I'm super pumped. So we're going to be doing this every week for the foreseeable future. So I hope you'll join us out there. Please feel free to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, get subscriptions, you know the drill. And also, please comment on these reviews. Let us know what you think of the comics. Let us know what you think of the reviews. And also, are we taking suggestions here, Mike Dell? What do you think?
Yeah, if you want. Now, when I'm picking comic books from the 70s and 80s, I'm going to try and focus on obscure ones, not like famous ones.
Okay, sure.
And also, I hope, what do you think, Michael? At some point throughout this run, what about guests? We'll have guests come on and join us.
Absolutely, that'd be great. Yep. So yeah, it's going to be a ton of fun. So yeah, we'll see you guys next week for Brave and the Bold number 192. This is Flea Market Fantasy.